And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, where we are almost always wrong, almost all of the time. But we have a guest on here who's probably slightly less wrong than we are. Seriah from Where Did the Road Go? We've been having a fantastic conversation with him about some of the work he's been doing and just the things he's been thinking about on all kinds of paranormal activity and UFO activity, and putting it all together and wondering if there are connections and if we might be able to look at all these things as part of some kind of similar phenomena. And Seriah, so we were talking during the break, Seriah, and I wanted to bring this up that you said that you were talking about how people who had UFO experiences and people who had near-death experiences had similar experiences.
Yes.
Like that seemed to be poltergeist related and other kinds of strange psi phenomena.
And Kundalini awakening.
Yeah. So to me, on the one hand, I guess you would look at that and say, how can that be if these are two totally different things? But another way to look at it might be that once someone has been awakened to any kind of extra normal experience, like a near-death experience or a UFO experience or an abduction or something like that, that this does open them up. It changes them, and then they begin to have these poltergeist-like Kundalini. Because, again, one of the things we're talking about is could these poltergeist-like things be actually focused on a person? So is that possible? That the
kind of like the opening of the third eye in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Or like
it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
I think my gut feeling at this point is that near-death experiences and what people think of as alien abductions are far more connected than we realize.
Yeah.
They both seem to be almost shamanic awakening experiences.
Yes, I agree with that.
And, and the thing is, one of the reasons I started really getting into studying this stuff, so part of it's just a personal journey. Honestly, but part of the reason I started, really trying to figure it out was because we're looking at phenomena that we've been studying in some cases for centuries, and we've gotten nowhere. So, like, it says to me that if after all this time of studying this stuff, we're no further along than we were 50 years ago, say, we're probably on the wrong track.
Yeah.
If UFOs were as simple as extraterrestrials coming to the planet, we would know by now. If Bigfoot was just an ape in the woods, we would know by now. And even the most, hardened flesh and blood Bigfoot person will tell you, yeah, I don't know why we haven't found one by now. Like a body, captured one. Nothing's perfect. No animal out there is so perfect that with all these people looking for it, no one's ever been able to find as much as a body, much less a live one.
Right.
And with UFOs, there's just way too many UFO sightings. Even when you discount all the ones that are possibly something known, you still have too many UFO sightings and too much variation in them to suggest that, some people from another planet came here to visit us.
Yeah.
It's like that doesn't, and I think Jacques Vallée pointed out that if this stuff is not oriented towards us, if they're just showing up to collect, samples of, foliage or whatever, we're only seeing them, a small fraction of the time they're here, which means there must be, how many sightings going on a regular basis that we don't see, or how many visitations?
Yeah. I've got a multi-level point here that I've been brewing on. So
right.
you brought up in the beginning of, the thing with the gorilla. So there's the obvious aspect of our existence, our experience, that there are things that we pay attention to and things that we don't. You can, like, just from my experience doing audio editing, like, I may become aware of some noise that I had never heard before in a song. And then, like, say it's a mistake, like playing guitar and the pick is smacking the body of the guitar and it makes this tick sound.
Right.
You know, tick, 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 like that. I hear it one time. And then when I start going through all the music, I hear it all over the place. Never had heard it before.
Yep.
And so I start noticing it and I become more and more sensitive to it. So there's that aspect of our ability to experience or see these things that you may just not be paying attention, or like the third eye idea that you may have senses that become heightened. And then once they're heightened, then you're paying attention to them a lot more and you develop that sense even more.
Right.
To where you start seeing stuff all the time, and then there are times when you maybe get too focused on other things, and that sense sort of goes away. It's no longer being exercised, and so you have a period in your life where all this crazy stuff happened, and it was because you were paying attention to it all the time. So that's one idea. Another one is like the idea of agency behind these things. I think of. Take, for example, I was trying to think of an analogy. So if you're sitting in a room and it's perfectly still, but there's a window and you're looking outside, and out in the sky, you see something, flying around, circling around out there. And you're like, what is that flying around up in the sky? Well, if there was nothing else in your field of view, but just say the skylight or something, you're looking up there and you're seeing something flying around. It might look like it has agency, like it's a bug or a bird or something that's darting around up there. But if you went outside, you might notice there's all this other environmental stuff going on. There's wind blowing around, and it's just like a feather or a leaf that's being whirled up and moved around for a time. It has no agency, right? But it could be a bug. So like some bug or some animal could look just like or be making the same types of moves as a thing that doesn't have any consciousness or isn't thinking about what it's doing or attempting to do things.
Sure.
So you have scenarios in nature where you can't tell without the broader context whether there's agency or there isn't. But the point is that sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. And I just top that off with that all of those things, an outside with wind blowing around and light reflecting off of something for you to sense it, whether it's a leaf or an actual bug, you have to have the entire environment of the universe, nature, in order to get that scenario in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of like what Marty has been talking to us about with the UFO phenomena. Trying to lump all of this stuff into one thing is probably not the best way to go about it, because we do live in this vast universe with all kinds of forces interacting. Like with the solar activity, there's so many subtle things going on, possibly creating, there's all different kinds of environmental scenarios that there's just no way to really be able to figure out exactly what the scenario was when one person was in the woods thinking or feeling whatever they were feeling, and whether or not their experience was a being or something that they just noticed when they had never noticed things like that before. So it's very complicated. It's kind of what I'm getting.
No, it is very, and that's exactly part of what I'm trying to show. Like I said, when I'm trying to write this book, I'm going, oh man, like there's so many things this connects to. It's not like a simple answer. There's a lot of different stuff going on. It certainly involves things like consciousness, but it also involves environment and perception and all this other stuff. And it's almost infinitely complex.
Yes.
And that's why I think, now the big thing is trying to find this silver bullet that explains all paranormal phenomenon. It's like, you're not going to do that.
Right.
Like, because all of this stuff is different. Even if some of it's from the same source, it's coming out in different ways. And look at, like, when you talk about agency, look at the Marfa lights. So, those lights will, if someone chases them, they'll run away. But if you're standing there, they'll move closer to you. Some of this might be explained by simple electromagnetic effects. But, people who experience them say, oh, they seem like they're conscious. That doesn't mean they are.
Right.
Like, we don't know. I mean, yes, they seem to behave like they're conscious in some of their behaviors, but again, those behaviors might just be like, okay, so when you're driving a car toward them, you're literally pushing them away from you. And when you're standing still, they're just kind of hovering in towards you in some kind of field that we don't understand how, quite how it works.
Yeah. And there could also be a combination of multiple of these things. Like you start to become aware of things that you're not normally aware of. You start heightening certain senses. And then there are strange interactions of different energies and things at one time and your emotional state. And maybe some agency out there takes advantage of the energy like you were talking about. And you do actually have an encounter with something. But maybe the next time you notice that thing, it doesn't have agency. I mean, this could be any number of combinations.
So the other thing is, you mentioned like when people focus on this stuff, there are certainly people who have one-off experiences.
Yeah.
Most of those are sort of this like distant sort of thing, like they see a weird light in the sky. Most people have had at least one or two weird experiences that they can't explain. Whether or not it's truly something unexplainable by our current, knowledge is another thing. But like usually even people who claim like, oh, I don't believe in that stuff. And then you talk to them a few minutes and they'll be like, well, there was this one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so, you have that, someone might once in their life see a Bigfoot run across the road. But what you see more commonly
could have been a hybrid.
Is that people have experiences and then they have more experiences.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be a matter of now you're open to this, you're focused on it. But recurring experiences, like legitimate recurring experiences, are actually more common than singular experiences. And occasionally you'll hear people say, oh, well, I don't believe anyone who's had a bunch of experiences. Why would they, why would all these different things happen to them? And it's a matter of, well, they may not be that different. There may be a common thread that runs through all these things that once you have this experience, why does someone who has a Bigfoot encounter in the woods then have poltergeist activity? Well, those two things should be separate things. And then, a year later, they see a UFO and it's like, oh, you think, well, they're just making it up at this point, but that's actually not uncommon at all.
Yeah, and that does imply that there is some kind of connection, whatever it may be, whether the connection is being made through the person or the connection is that all of these phenomena are somehow associated with each other in some way.
At least in the way that you might detect them.
Yeah, that's right.
You're able to experience them. But, there is obviously there are going to be scenarios where once you have the first experience, you become like, it's kind of like you're looking over your shoulder all the time. And then maybe you mistake certain things, or it's easier for you to believe that the book just flew off the shelf when there really was a plausible, just regular everyday cat in the room knocking your books off the shelf. That you don't go looking for that because you've now accepted. You've accepted these extraordinary circumstances because of a truly extraordinary experience that you've had. So that can also happen, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, certainly. And I mean, there have been times where, the thing is, I drill down on this stuff as much as possible where I'm like, okay, what's actually happening here? Is there another explanation for it? Because sometimes I'll experience something that seems strange, but I'm like, and I will exhaust every possibility trying to make sure that it's not that I'm missing something.
Right.
There was I'm sitting at my computer, and as I'm sitting at my computer, I keep hearing this faint ringing noise from the next room. And I'm like, what is that? And I walk into the next room and I hear nothing. And I come back and I sit at the computer and I'm doing stuff and I hear a faint ringing noise. But every time I get up, it stops. And I'm like, why is it only happening when I'm sitting at the computer? So my girlfriend at the time comes in and I said, okay, I'm just going to sit here and work. Tell me if you hear a ringing noise. And I start working and she goes, yeah. And she walks over and the mouse cable was rubbing a hard drive cage. Very, very light. So every time I moved the mouse, it was just very lightly rubbing it and making sort of a ringing noise. And I'm like, Okay, thanks. But it was behind where the computer monitor was, so I didn't even know it was there.
Yeah.
You sound like an IT guy. Your computer is actually multiple pieces laying in a tray on the back of the desk.
No comment. But yeah, I mean so sometimes you can't do that. Something happens, you go, I don't know what that was.
Right.
And especially with Kundalini, like there was an experience a few weeks ago where I'm sure probably all of it was in my head because I had a massive Kundalini burst. I laid down. This buzzing that was in my ears suddenly stopped. I didn't even know there was a buzzing until it stopped. And I was like, whoa, okay, the buzzing stopped that I didn't know was there. That's interesting. And then a little bit later, so as soon as that happened, I started seeing like all these, like I, for some reason, looked at my hands and I'm seeing these like designs and stuff on the backs of my hands. Like there was enough light in the room where I could just vaguely see the back of my hands. And it went from like almost geometric designs to almost looking like cartoons, like if you were projecting it from a film projector on a rough surface. And I'm going, what? Okay, that's a pretty cool hallucination, and I'm just watching it. I know it's not real. They're not really there. And eventually it fades. And then I hear this super loud boom, almost like an explosion from the other side of the house. And I'm like, I don't think that was real. I think that was in my head. And a moment later, I feel like the vibration of it just run through my body, and then everything stopped. Like the whole Kundalini episode ended.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm pretty sure every bit of that was totally in my head.
Man.
Okay, I got one.
Yeah.
I have not been able to figure out if this is real or not. But occasionally, I can't even tell you with what frequency. I guess maybe this has happened, I don't know, a handful of times, where I'll be laying in bed at night, going to sleep, and I've got my eyes closed, and I'm seeing the room.
Yeah.
Like in a dim light.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. And I open my eyes, and it's like, okay, close my eyes, still seeing the room. And then I can take my hand and move my hand around above my face, and I can see it like a dim light.
Yep.
That's in the shape of my hand. And even I can close and open my hand, hold up fingers, everything. And my eyes are totally closed. And I'm like, I haven't been able to figure this out. And then sometimes if I try to do it, it just doesn't work at all. I can't see it.
I've had that happen before. And one of the things I'll do when that happens, I'm like, am I actually see?
Yeah.
I'll try and look at something like, say, the clock and be like, okay, can I read what time it is? And I can never do it.
Yeah. I don't have a clock, but I can definitely see my hand, which is the weird thing. And I'm like, I don't know. I should grab Laura's hand and put it in front of my face. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. The most common thing that happens to me is I get these popping noises.
And
Exploding. No. I'm. It's not when I'm going to sleep. I'll just be in my, up in the tower in my house, and I'll be at the computer desk reading or doing something, and behind me or somewhere in the room around me somewhere, something pops really loud. Like it sounds like somebody like flicked the table. You know what I mean? It's not coming from a wall or the floor or the ceiling. It's coming from a table or I've got a light table in there that's right behind me, and I've got a coffee table over next to me, and then there's another table off to the left, and then there's my desk in front of me. And it always sounds like something on one of those surfaces just went pow, like somebody flicked it, like popped it with their hand.
Huh.
And this happens often enough to where I'm just like, okay, yeah, I'll look in the direction to see, did something fall over? Nothing, and nothing has ever moved, and it's not the house settling because it isn't coming out of the walls or the floor or the ceiling. And I can never figure out what it is, but it sounds like something is like tapping or like slapping the table really loud. And this happens, I don't know, a couple of times a month.
Huh.
And it's pretty random. And now I'll hear it, bow, and I'll look over there. I'm like, yeah, okay.
You can never trust anything, though, because you have a cat.
That's right. I do have a cat.
I wonder how much people regularly experience very minor poltergeist things
Yeah.
and don't even know it. Like they don't notice it, or they just, assume it's their cat.
Yeah. Or it's the people will say, oh, that was the house settling. And I'm like, really? Explain to me how it made that noise just now. Give me the physics on how we just got that really loud screeching noise from your house or whatever.
And it could be little outbursts of energy that don't mean a lot,
Yeah.
but just, it's just kind of like a release valve.
Yes. And I try to pay attention to stuff like that because I'm, like you are and like Kyle, I'm interested in weird things. Mm-hmm. So when weird things happen, I pay a lot of attention to them and I focus on them and I ask myself, is there, a regular explanation, a mundane explanation for this, and what would it be? Or do I say, okay, that was actually really weird? And
like with the computer example, it's easy to not be able to figure out the mundane explanation sometimes because there might be just stuff in the environment you're not aware of.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these popping noises, they never freak me out, but I have yet to be able to determine what causes it
Or where they're coming from.
or where they're coming from exactly. I kind of know the direction in general, but in the end, I don't decide, okay, that was a poltergeist. I'm just like, all right, I don't know what that was.
That's how I feel about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was, but I'm going back to sleep.
That's right.
There have been times where as soon as I lay down, I'll hear a voice say something, and I'll be like, okay, if there was a camera in here, would it have picked up the voice? Like, was it in my head? What was that? And sometimes it's creepy stuff. Like, I was just recording some notes from the last few months because I kind of fell behind. And there was one where I laid down to go to sleep and I turned the lights off and a woman's voice whispered, "There's somebody in the house."
Oh, man.
And
Why couldn't they say, "Hey Siri, turn on the lights"?
And I'm laying there and I literally wrote down that I said, I know there's not someone in the house. And then I have like wise cams everywhere. So I picked up the phone, I checked all the wise cams. I was like, there's no one in the house. Why would you do that?
Yeah. Man.
Like whether it just be my brain doing some auditory hallucination or what, it's just like, of all the things you could whisper to me.
Right.
And it's me.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that was the other thing I said. Yeah, it was you. You just whispered in my ear.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I know. Thanks. All right. So let's move forward with the mechanism.
Yes. So, and that brings us to, I can never remember the guy's name. He wrote a book called Illuminations. French Canadian author. It's going to drive me nuts.
Maybe the watcher will figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay. But he proposes UFOs as poltergeists. Now, he looks at it as in more of a societal-based thing. So he's looking at UFO flaps, periods where there are a lot of UFO sightings in one area. And he's trying to, like a poltergeist, say, okay, is there societal stress happening at this point in history that, this might be sort of the release valve for it? So like a poltergeist, except because it's bigger, it's creating a UFO flap. And like I read the book is great. And he points out things like, again, similarities between UFOs and poltergeists are things like, UFOs, the one that got me that I didn't put together for whatever reason is the falling leaf motion. A lot of times UFOs when they drop, they don't drop straight down. They'll drop down like in this falling leaf motion.
Yeah.
And in poltergeist cases, you'll get like rocks or something or some other heavy object will suddenly appear in the room and then fall in a falling leaf motion like it doesn't weigh anything. And he said that and I went, oh, son of a bitch, she's right.
Yeah.
And like the theory has has some merit. Like, it's interesting, but there were definitely points where he was trying to kind of like fit it together. Like you and Marty were talking about like the Foo Fighters and stuff.
Yes.
Well, what more stressful environment was there than being in a fighter plane in World War II?
Yeah. Especially a
So,
bomber.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that could be a group poltergeist phenomena. The Foo Fighters may have just been generated by our this heavy emotional energy that was there, generating light phenomena around the planes.
Yeah, that
And
is interesting. Yeah.
And I think he suggests that in Illuminations. I'm not sure because I don't remember. I haven't read it in a while. It makes so much sense. I can't imagine that he wouldn't have suggested that. But he goes on to suggest other pieces of this, and I was like, wow, this is a really good book. It's a really interesting theory. I'm like, but it's not, like, again, it doesn't explain all UFOs.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a possible mechanism for some UFO encounters, like things like the Foo Fighters. You know, if you're in a military situation or even in a nuclear bunker or something, you know, a nuclear launch site, I mean, that's got to be a stressful job in certain situations.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so they if it is similar to poltergeist experience phenomena, then the stress of the people in the situation would maybe be the focal point or the energy source or the causal agent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it may be a group thing rather than an individual thing. And it may also build up too. I mean, we don't know if you're in a situation where a bunch of different people are under stress, that energy may build up into the environment, and that's where you may get some of these residual hauntings.
Yeah. That just reminded me of that just reminded me of the other thing that Marty was saying was that some of the bomber pilots or crews noticed that like things were rattling on the outsides of the hulls of their plane.
Yes, you mentioned that. Like there was like a coin or something, wasn't there?
Yeah, he was saying that at least in some cases they turned out to be these weird coins that may have been some kind of a mine attempt, but in other cases that they were just getting like it seemed like little pebbles were being thrown at the plane.
Right. Because I remember you saying almost like a poltergeist, and I'm like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Poltergeist throwing money. Yep.
But stones, I mean, that's super common, and coins wouldn't be out of belief level. I'm sure there's poltergeist cases where coins were thrown.
Yeah, or they just appear out of thin air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, apports are a thing that happen.
Yep.
And that's another thing. We don't know that mechanism. When we were talking earlier about these things, manifesting in our world, we have these apports, these things that just appear, and we don't know where they came from.
Yeah.
There's, again, if we go back to Keith Linder's case of the Seattle Demon House, at one point a Bible appears in front of their bedroom door. The bedroom door is shut. They open the door, and there's a Bible that's been singed.
Oh, yes. I remember this.
And they're like, oh my God, this thing must be demonic. It just burned a Bible, et cetera, which is an understandable response.
Yeah.
When Steve Mira tried to replicate that with the same type of Bible, he found that if he put a flame anywhere near one of those pages, they just disintegrated. Yeah, he could not replicate that singeing.
Yeah, they're so thin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the thing about apports is that when people have, like, say, a bunch of pebbles suddenly fall in someone's house that come out of nowhere and they pick them up, they're warm.
Yep.
So whatever process is creating these things, it might be enough to cause these very thin, flammable Bible pages to singe, but not hot enough to actually set them on fire.
Right.
So basically something or them, whatever this caused this apport of a Bible, may not have meant for it to be a burning Bible. It just happened to do that because, well, it was apported.
Yeah. Yeah, we did 2 shows on a book called Anomalies. And what we focused on for that book, the book is great. I recommend anybody get it. It's full of just weird things that have happened of all kinds. And he does go into UFO cases and things, but the parts we focused on were the anomalous things falling from the sky
Yes.
And there was some other stuff we focused on too, weird electrical phenomena and stuff. But there was just lots of cases, and Charles Fort did this too, right? That things rain out of the sky with no explanation, but very good. The witnesses are credible, in a lot of cases. And there were cases where rocks are being thrown at a house for days.
Yes.
And cops get called and no one can figure it out. And these stones are coming from, they just seem that no one can figure out the source.
It's almost like Bigfoot's throwing them from the woods.
Yeah, except that they send people out into the woods while the rocks are being thrown. And there's all these people out there searching for the source of these rocks. And they just seem to appear in midair and hit the house. Yeah.
Yep. And, in other haunting locations, you get stuff that not only appears, but stuff that disappears.
Yes.
And sometimes it reappears and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I've talked to people who have regularly had experiences with things disappearing, and they've said, if I say, could I have my brush back? Like, I'll walk into the next room and my brush will be sitting there. So it's almost like even if it is us, it might be working with some of its own agency,
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. That sounds like something with agency, unless there's like I don't know, maybe I guess you could say that the intention, you intentionalize it by saying it, and then your subconscious supplies you the brush that it took away. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, where do you draw that line between us and the other? That's the other thing.
Yeah. How connected is everything, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything might just be one big piece of consciousness splintered off into pieces.
Yeah.
So inevitably, we're all connected.
That's true. Even the standard model says that.
And technically, we all come from the same point of life.
Right.
So we're all connected back at some point to the whatever point life started. There, that's something that's always an interesting way to look at it, because you can have a kid, but you're really just transferring part of your life force into that child. Like you're not creating life. You're just passing it on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I'd say that, one interesting way on the everything is connected, even if you look at it purely from like the standard model physics and materialism, which basically the standard model says that the universe started with the Big Bang. And if you go with quantum physics and how entanglement works, then everything is connected through entanglement because of the Big Bang. Because it all started at that point, and that's how you entangle something. So everything is connected, even if you look at it in a purely materialist way.
So I like the idea of some UFOs being literally expressions of poltergeist activity. It makes sense. Also in Bigfoot encounters where because most of the time when people have these quote encounters, they don't see a creature. Like 95% of the time they're getting the vocalizations, the wood knocks, the rocks thrown, but they're not actually seeing an actual creature.
Yeah.
So
that could be anything, right?
Yeah, and when the rocks are thrown, if someone goes and picks them up, they're warm, just like an apport.
Yep.
And of course, the explanation is, well, Bigfoot was holding it in his hand, so it's warm. And it's like, but isn't this just the way this phenomenon works at this point? Like, it gives you that half and half thing. It's like, yeah, it makes sense as an ape in the woods, except we can't find it. But yet it mimics all this other stuff that we see in other encounters, like poltergeists.
Right. Yeah, and when like 14 rocks get thrown at you and they're all warm, I'm sorry, but he wasn't holding all those in his hand.
They have big hands, I hear. Not just big feet. Maybe they got some pockets,
Yeah, they're marsupials. That's it.
But yeah, so I actually made a note about that Foo Fighter comment about the coins and stuff, because I thought that was an interesting observation you had there about that. Because I hadn't heard that part of it before for the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
So again, it kind of leans toward the idea that this is, poltergeist-like in some way, shape, or form. I'm trying to see if I made any other notes here about you guys. Oh, it was it was interesting when he was so kind of a case against the extraterrestrial idea. So Marty had talked about a stealth fighter that they got from that the UK had captured from Germany,
Oh yes.
and he said they had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't figure it out, and they had to turn it over to the Americans, who then figured out, what was going on. So when you say, okay, we captured this saucer and we back engineered it, we had trouble figuring out what another technologically similar Earth culture was doing.
Yes.
But we're going to back engineer a craft from a non-human, non-Earth culture that could be millennia ahead of us,
Right.
and make something out of that. That would be like going back and giving an iPhone to someone in, 100 BC. They might get a couple of minor things out of, but they're not going to figure out how to make the chips work and how to replicate it,
Yes.
No matter how much time you give them, they're not at that level where that's going to make sense.
Especially not if it relies on an entire network of other things like the iPhone does.
Yeah.
Right.
Remote things that
Yeah. The iPhone is just one piece of an enormously massive network of technology.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But even something bigger like a laptop. I mean, what's someone at 100 BC gonna make out of a laptop? And like that's
No, I get your point.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
when
sure.
it's coming from a human culture. So an alien culture is not necessarily going to make things the same way we do.
Yep.
Yep, they may see an infrared and it just looks like a chunk of obsidian to us.
Right. Exactly. So the other thing that kind of triggered some of these thoughts was a book from Eric Wargo called Time Loops. And he talks about the way time works and the way things like precognition and stuff work. And again, precognition is something that has been shown again and again in laboratory tests on a small scale. So we can say there is science that supports the idea that precognition is a thing. Right here in Ithaca, Daryl Bem, I think it was, did the test that got the most coverage, and that's because the media found a way to spin it, which was by saying that porn proves psychic abilities.
Right. Yeah. Great
And
headline.
so he was even on the Colbert Report for it. So and basically what it was a test where they would show random images to people while they were hooked up to like an MRI or whatever to show brain activity. And they would find that the person would react to particularly sexual images prior to the image even being picked by the computer. And prior to really their knowledge of that was the next picture, but their brain would already be responding to it.
Yeah, and I think it was a big point was not only were they having some kind of pre-cognitive response, but the computer was designed to choose the image like fractions of an instant before it showed it. It had this gigantic database of images, and it runs an algorithm or whatever it is, some kind of pseudo-random number generator that helps it pick a random image out of this massive database. So the fact that the people were beginning to respond to the evocative image before the computer had even made a choice was what was really interesting about it.
Right. And it has been peer-reviewed and replicated.
Yeah.
So this is legitimate science. This is not, maybe because even he said, we need someone else to replicate this in case our equipment was off or something to that effect. But it's been replicated. I mean, peer review is, neither here nor there. There's a lot of problems with peer review, but
replication
now
is key.
Different labs have replicated this and found the same thing.
But is this precognition or are they actually having an effect on the random number generator?
Well, sure.
With their mind.
That's possible. I would say in this case it's precognition, because otherwise it's not like they're seeing more of the sexual images.
Yeah.
If you were seeing a higher number than they should randomly of the sexual images, then I'd say they're affecting the number generator. But these were also just regular people. These were not people who were psychics or anything like that, which suggests that all of us have this ability.
Yeah.
This is an inherent ability. And where Eric takes that in time loops is that everything that's happened is already going to happen. Like, we're in kind of a block universe. There's no free will. And sometimes we just get pieces of that information ahead of time.
Yeah. So you said this before, block universe. What does that mean?
It means that we don't have free will. Like, everything is set.
Okay.
But we're experiencing it linearly, like watching a movie. You know, we don't know what's coming next, but, you know, and we in our lives, we think we're making choices, but we've already made those choices. We've already, you know, it's kind of like before life, we've already set everything out, and this is how everything went. And now we're just living through it.
Okay.
And the whole universe is like that. So that's a block universe. There's no option for change or for free will or anything like that. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if there's any way to ever find out if that's the case. You know, unless we learn how to make living restore points.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to save my life here, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to see what happens if I chose the other thing.
Yes.
I mean, and it may also be that life works in a linear fashion, like certain video games do, where you do have some free will, but inevitably you're going to end up in the same place.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this when I was listening to your other presentations on this concept, and I was going to tell you about there's this ancient idea of fate versus destiny. Yeah. And that, you know, those they kind of sound like the same thing. But at least in a lot of ancient stories, myths, or however you would put them, oral traditions, they're treated as two different things. Fate is something that you can affect. What is your fate? You know, and you at least in the way these stories are told, you can take your fate into your own hands.
Right.
Destiny is set by the gods or whatever it is whatever the old myth would tell you. And so there's tons of, I mean, I'm sure you can think of there's tons of stories where someone in the story is told what their destiny is, right? Yeah, and then they spend the rest of the story trying to make that not happen because they don't want it to take place. And and that changes their fate to the point to where their destiny actually occurs, right? Everything they do actually makes the destiny take place.
Absolutely.
And so it gives you this idea of circularity, because then you start to wonder, well, if they had never been told that's what their destiny was, would that have happened? Because they wouldn't have taken all these steps to stop it from happening, which is what actually causes it to take place.
Right.
So, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, because you've in your other explanations, you've got into this where you're starting to say, like, the stuff that happens at the end is actually the first thing.
Right. That things don't always happen in a linear way.
Right. Yeah. And so I see a lot of these stories about destiny and fate as being this kind of circular, paradoxical thing.
Yeah, it very well could be.
Yeah. And even in modern, in the Matrix, when Neo goes to meet the woman who is the black lady who is she's the Oracle.
Oh, yeah.
And she says, "Don't worry about the vase." And he's like, "What vase?" He turns and bam, knocks the vase over. And he's like, "Oh God, I'm sorry." And she's like, "I told you not to worry about it. Now what's really going to bake your noodle is, would it have happened if I hadn't have said anything?" That's the same. Right. That's the same kind of circular thing. Is she predicting the future, or does she cause it by giving him this prediction?
Right.
Okay.
So the other thing he demonstrates in time loops that's very interesting, particularly dealing with bigger disasters, and this also brings the emotional component in. So he suggests that when people have premonitions of disasters, they are not having a premonition of the actual disaster, but them finding out about it.
Yeah.
And one of the more convincing things he shows about this is there was a guy who, I forget what happened, like a volcano went off and it killed something like 10,000 people, or 100, maybe it killed 100,000 people or something like that. And the article that was initially posted said 10,000 people. And in his premonition, he had 10,000 people. And he had written it down, and he said, this is going to happen. I'm not sure when, but this volcano is going to go off, and it's going to kill 10,000 people. So he, and the first time he saw this, verification of this, he saw this newspaper article that said 10,000 people. And so he was like, oh, see, this is it. And so what he's suggesting in time loops is that what he's actually having a premonition of is his emotional reaction of seeing the article that says 10,000 people died or were injured or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And again, that suggests an emotional component, if not because of the disaster, because of the fulfillment of the prophecy.
Right. Because the real number was actually 100,000.
Right.
But
so he had the wrong number, but it was the number in the article.
Yeah. And that does tie in a little bit to, like, for example, the thing with remote viewing, where they found that when people are, after they've done the remote viewing on the unknown target, if they're shown the target later, that the remote viewing is always better, even though that's a weird retrocausal circular thing.
Yep. And there was something Robert Schoch had talked about too, and I think it was another Cordell experiment where kids who took tests and then studied afterwards would get better results as long as they didn't know what their results were till after they studied.
Yeah.
And that's like, well, that makes no sense whatsoever, unless it don't always work in that past to present to future way that we think it does.
Yeah. I think we made a joke about this. Didn't we have a joke on the show about this, like study for your test afterwards? We were trying to tell people, try this out. Go take that test and then study afterwards and see if it works.
I just want to say that might have been Daryl Bem's research as well.
All right, we got to take a final break, and then we'll come back and finish this out. All right.
Fastest 2 hours in podcasting, already over.
That's right.
And now we are starting the third hour, which is kind of a common occurrence.
Become very common.
That's right. All right, Seriah, where are we going, buddy?
Well, first I want to say I want to try this. Whoa, hold on. I want to try this. I want to try to do a podcast and then do the research for it after.
Oh, yeah, I do that all the time. It works great.
I'll finish your book after I have you on the show. We'll see how good the interview is before before I put it up.
All right, so where are we going?
We're up to UFOs and poltergeist time loops. So when I was watching Hellier, there was a bit. I wasn't, people love Hellier, and I kind of get it. But it didn't do a lot for me. But there was one part that really stuck out to me. So they were doing, and I hadn't seen anyone do this before, but apparently it was more known in ghost hunting circles. They had one of those ghost box things that scans the radio stations. And it just flips back and forth, and you're supposed to try, spirits are supposedly able to talk through them by grabbing snippets of audio, I guess. I don't really know who came up with this or why anyone would think it worked, but some people claim they get really good results from it. And what they did is they took one of their researchers. They're sitting on the front porch of this house in the wilderness, and he puts on headphones to hear the box, and he puts on a face mask so he can't see. So he's basically in like a sensory deprivation thing, mostly listening to static. And, anytime a word comes across, he says it, and they're kind of relating it to things that are happening, but not like it was nothing that convinced me there was any connection other than, oh, that word is like one of the words was coyote. And they're like, well, we are in the woods. I'm like, unless a coyote walks up to the porch right after he says coyote, that's not,
Yeah, coyotes are desert creatures. They're not in the woods.
Oh no, you get coyotes in the woods.
Oh, okay. All right.
We have all over here.
Oh, okay.
But the point is, like, unless there was no direct connection other than the fact that they're out in the wilderness and the word coyote came through. If the word coyote came through and then one ran through the yard, or one ran through the yard and then he said coyote, well, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
But he's sitting there and he's doing this, and when they take him out of it, he's like, wow, that was like really trancy. And he's like, at some point I saw this tin can. It was like this little tin can. He's describing it and everything. And he's like, I don't know. I've never had that happen before. It just like the image of this tin can was just so strong in my head. I have no idea why. So like the next day, they really have no trail to follow at this point in the show. And they just go out to some old cave that was like a train track at one point going through a tunnel. And they're really hyped up on this, and well, maybe we can find something here. And they're checking it out, and the guy trips over the can, and he starts freaking out. And he's going, "This is the can I saw. This is the can I saw." And now naturally they interpret this as we're in the right spot. Like he saw the can, and then we came here, and here's the can. And I, after having read time loops, looked at that and went, "What if the reason he saw the can is because he tripped over the can and got really excited?"
Yeah.
And that, people have a problem with that. They're like, no, but why would he be excited if he hadn't seen it? It's like, because he did see, like, these things aren't happening in a vacuum. They're not happening in 1 + 1 + 1. They're happening all at once.
Yeah, I had the same problem when I was first trying to think through this. I'm like, well, that's just a paradox, right? You can't.
Right.
But that's if you want to view time as a linear thing, then yes, it's a paradox. But if time is something else, it may not be a paradox.
Paradox.
Yeah.
And who knows if things also can change? Like maybe the first time they, like in some reality, they went to the thing and he didn't get excited from the can, but somehow it still transferred back to him because he kicked the can. And then the next time he got it, and it just kept, in reality, kept rewriting itself until it created this loop.
Oh, yeah.
But that's, obviously complete speculation. And apparently Eric Wargo also cited the same thing when he watched Hellier. Someone told me he did a talk, and he pointed that out as a great example of a time loop.
So it's not really a time. Well, okay, so maybe it's a time loop in the sense that this is happening over and over until he's getting super excited and has a really powerful image of the can.
Well, it's a time loop in that it's not happening in a normal,
Linear.
typical way.
Okay, yeah, that the cause is in the future,
Right.
and the result is in the past. That's the loop.
Yes.
Okay.
So, that was just, one of those things where I'm like, it may be just that. Because the thing is, when they did that, they weren't really following a trail. That was the thing that bugged me about it. I'm like, and they walk onto these loose rocks, and they're like making, trying to get EVPs and stuff, and they walk off of these loose rocks, and you hear like rocks, and they're like, did someone throw a rock? I'm like, you just walked on rubble. But I also understand that in the heat of the moment, you're not thinking that way.
Yeah.
In the heat of the moment, you're like really incensed. You're trying to get something to happen, and then you hear a noise, and you're like, "Oh my God, what was that?" But so that is one of the other reasons why I feel like that's not, like, it doesn't make sense that it was leading them there, because there was nothing there. This really wasn't connected to what they were investigating. It's almost like they just needed to put something in the show. So they went to this spooky cave. But the time loop idea kind of does make sense because there's an emotional element, and he was in this trance state where he would have been able to pick up on it.
Yeah. He was in an altered state, at least in some way.
Exactly. Because he has static going in his ears. His eyes are covered. And he said he felt really weird when he took that stuff off.
Yep. White noise can help you put yourself into an altered state. That's for sure.
Yep. So I mean, that's sort of the time loop concept. So one of the things I applied all these disparate pieces to, and I don't know why my head put this together, but when you deal with this is like the perfect storm sort of thing. Point Pleasant and the Mothman prophecies. So in Point Pleasant, you had environmental factors because that whole area is sort of an area that's known for weird stuff, and it's sort of one of those portal type areas. Then you have John Keel, who's investigating what's going on, and John Keel is in his books says the people here tend to be very psychically sensitive. Some of them are aware of it and some of them are not, but he said like most of the people he talked to seem to have I don't know what he was judging this by, but he said they seem to be very psychically sensitive. So you might have a sort of genetic sort of thing going on where these people are more open to this stuff. And then you have a disaster, which was the collapse of the Silver Bridge on what was it, 2 days before Christmas or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So you have a small community that is potentially psychically sensitive anyway, and a disaster that is unthinkable. All these people dying right before Christmas in this small community. How much worse can you get than that?
Yeah.
So what I started wondering is, was the bridge collapse the first thing that happened? Is the bridge collapse what said instead of so some people had dreams of presence in the river and things like that, and they didn't know what it meant. But what if some of these people were picking up on this information in the past and it was causing them stress? Like on some level, they, that information, they knew the bridge was going to collapse, if they didn't know it consciously. So it creates this sort of unconscious poltergeist energy that's building up, and it's building up in the whole community because they're all picking it up. It affected everybody. It's a very tight-knit, small community. This could have been enough to create the UFO sightings, the Mothman, and maybe this stuff started picking up a form after enough people saw it, where it started to become more consistent. Because the Mothman, there's no reason to believe the Mothman could have been a real creature. That's not something that could exist. It's not, and it's all this stuff also stops at the bridge collapse.
Yeah.
So you have this spike of energy for 3 years. You have people having poltergeist encounters, monster encounters, UFO encounters, all the stuff that's connected to this stuff. And then the bridge collapses and it all stops. So my thought is that maybe these things are, in this case, is something that happened in the future, sending energy backwards. And it's, when I say perfect storm, it's because of it's such a strong emotional thing in such a small community, in a portal area, in an area where people are already sensitive to this stuff, which is why you don't see this, like the Mothman prophecies kind of stand out. That whole Point Pleasant thing kind of stands out in paranormal history like nothing else. And the same thing may happen with things like banshees. And there may be a genetic factor, and there may be a time loop factor where someone dies, someone the person cares about dies, and they're not translating that information coming back in time properly, and so it's creating a poltergeist, which again, banshees are basically poltergeists, and they tend to run in families, which would again, and say there might be a genetic component to this as well.
I wonder if people in Point Pleasant were psychic before all this stuff started to happen. I mean, there's no way to know, right?
And it's not like John Keel tested them. I think that was just his gut instinct that they seem to have more sensitive, be more sensitive to this stuff.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm just wondering, I wonder if it is this time loop retrocausality thing that was causing whatever it was that Keel was detecting. In other words, they all had a heightened psychic thing because they were in the midst of this event that was about to take place.
Right. And one of the puzzles about the whole Point Pleasant incident is that there's so much different stuff going on.
Yes.
It's not like it was just the Mothman. There's all this stuff going on. It was like a hotbed for a few years of just absolute weirdness.
That's right. But okay, so going back to something you said, you've said this multiple times, and in the other presentations, you said it's the bridge collapse is the first thing that happened.
Right.
Now, do you mean that it was the causal event, or do you mean
Yes.
that in some? Okay, that's what I thought. Because like the way that the timeline goes, it was the last thing that happened. But if it was still somehow the cause, retroactively,
because always work linearly. Future can affect the past, and past can affect the future.
Yes, right. So it's not the first thing that happened, but it was the causal agent.
Yes, thank you. Yes, should be cleared up. I just assume most people know it ended with the whole list of things ended with the bridge collapse.
Well, what I mean, maybe I'm playing with semantics here, but when you said it was the first thing that happened, I started to think maybe I don't fully understand what you mean by time loop.
Yes. It was the causal agent.
Okay.
The bridge collapse.
Okay.
People in the past were responding to something that hadn't happened yet.
Right.
And creating this, and it's entirely possible, especially with that much energy, that something could have just used it to start communicating with people.
Yeah, so the idea there would be that there was a massive retrocausal thing taking place, and that allowed something else to come in and start interacting. Is that what you're trying to say? Okay.
Yeah. So when you get all these entities, these men in black and stuff like that, and I think it was Zelia who pointed out that the men in black, they would always ask when in time they were.
Yeah. That's
you
right.
know, and they would always have cars that were just a little bit off the time period.
Yeah, that's right. Brand new, but not quite right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As if they're working from outside our model of time.
Yes.
And that's another thing you get. Like, what was the quote that Keel had? I think it was Indrid Cold said, "I'll see you in time."
Yes.
So the whole time, these entities are basically talking about time regularly. Like it's almost like they're trying to show us that things aren't the way we think they are.
Yeah.
And also when you have this poltergeist stuff, like people are like, well, why is it, if it's us, why is it scary? Because I think this stuff is based on whatever type of energy it's pulling from. So if you're stressed out and putting out angry emotional energy, you're going to get an angry ghost. You know, the stuff I experienced was not an angry ghost. It just seemed like something wanted to listen to AC/DC. But it wasn't scary. It wasn't, and obviously wasn't trying to hurt me.
I mean, it didn't.
Other than my ears.
It didn't scare you, but that would probably freak some people out.
Oh, sure, it'll freak some people out.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is it didn't escalate to anything where it was like throwing stuff at me or anything, probably because I don't react with that fear response.
Right. I mean, I've listened to your show for years. I've heard you tell plenty of paranormal stories, and your reaction is always like, okay, that was weird. Right. You're just. So if something has been trying to scare you for a while, it's totally failed, and it probably knows this at this point. Like, this is not going to work, but I'll try it anyway.
And you figure things like fear energy and stuff like that, anger, fear, those are easy and strong emotions.
Yeah.
So even if something is trying to get that and get us to generate that energy, it's going to do something scary. It's going to want to generate a fear response so it can get the energy it needs to manifest.
Yeah.
So the idea I get from this is like, I don't know if this is like probably stemming from Christian ideas, but the spirit world being timeless, or at least like above the dimension of time, therefore able to move throughout it freely. And so like emotions coming from the spirit are timeless in a way. So it's like you have this group of people in this town that are all closely knit together, and this event happens where all of their emotions are incredibly powerful. And it's like those emotions, they have a physical effect. Like we know that for sure. People's emotions have a physical effect on their bodies, on, you know, that's the main way we know that these strange, whatever emotion is, it affects us physically. But maybe if it's exists outside of the boundaries of you know, our linear experience of time, that like you have this really powerful emotional situation, and those emotions sort of spread out.
Yeah, they ripple effect
over time. So when you go back in time and you look at the situation, they are having a physical effect, but it's really strange. It's not a direct effect on the body of the person, or maybe it, you know, that's how it ends up resulting in these weird poltergeist type things that seem disconnected.
Right.
It's some kind of physical manifestation, but it's not the normal direct link. But it has to dissipate in some way physically. So it's dissipating in these weird discombobulated physical ways prior to the event in the linear experience of time. And then once the event happens, it's like contained within all of the bodies of the people who are experiencing it at that point.
Right.
And so then the poltergeist activity stops.
Yeah, because now they're throwing.
Now the physical effects are actually happening and being channeled directly through their physical bodies.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's really weird.
And again, if you look at a block universe model, then it's not even that strange, because this has always been something that was going to happen. And it may be also that there are certain elements of our lives, like I said, we may live somewhat linear lives with that sort of free will. Like you were saying with the fate and destiny sort of idea.
Yeah, that we have some agency, but we all have a destiny, and it is unchangeable. Yeah.
It's like being on I always compare it to like being on a river. You know, you're flowing down this river, and you can either go with the current, or you can kind of like fight it and try and stop and maybe, you know, pull off the river for a little bit, but you're always going to have to go back to the river.
Yeah. Yeah. Another way. Yep. I also think of it as a very complex series of paths. You're going to start at one end and end at the other, and you're going to come out of the series of paths in this one place because they all converge eventually. But on the way, you can choose whichever path you want. You're just going to eventually end up at the other end.
I always like what was it? Doctor Who said something about there are certain points in time that are fixed.
Yeah.
And I look at an event like 9/11 and I think, well, maybe that's one of those fixed events.
Yeah, it's a pivot or a fulcrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like one way or another, that's going to happen. So one way or another, that bridge was going to collapse and cause this trauma.
Yeah.
No, I mean, really, what all of this stuff, kind of the thing that I get from it all is like, I don't see a clear way that we're ever going to really figure out the way all of this stuff works. But learning about all these scenarios and all these different things that have happened to people makes me want to. It's like, man, I need to be more aware and try to pay more attention to gain my own experiences, right? Like, because I think if you shut out the possibility of there being a lot more to this reality than what we can see, you know, than our direct physical experience, then you're less likely to engage with it, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I don't know. It just makes me like, man, I need to pay more attention, grow longer tentacles.
And I think so much of this stuff is about pushing us forward. Like, okay, so not that stuff, but like when you're dealing with like near-death experiences, most people, not all, but most people who have near-death experiences find their lives changed for the better afterwards.
Yeah.
Right.
People, like Whitley Strieber, when he started with his, experiences, they were very negative, but over time, as he started, dealing with them better, they became very positive, transformative experiences.
And there have been many, people that are considered prophets or whatever, in the past that obviously they used their abilities to kind of navigate their way around the strange aspect of our existence to the betterment of humanity.
Right.
So it's definitely not something to be taken lightly. And yeah, there's good and bad in any type of tool that you might use. Ways to turn things to good, but you gotta, I don't know. It's like, makes me want to pay more attention.
And like I said, I think this stuff, the reason sometimes this is frightening is because it's picking up on negative energy.
Well, there's negative energy out there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's like the easiest thing to find.
Yeah. So whether or not it's intending to get negative energy or it's just drawn to it because it's the easiest type of energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Love is a very strong emotion too, but it doesn't come on as quickly or as violently as anger or something like that. And it's often channeled in a more healthy way.
Yeah.
Now what okay.
There's not a lot of books out there on how to make sure everything sucks, because that's easy.
I was going to point out the Lover's Lane sightings of UFOs
Yes.
and stuff like that.
And
So
monsters. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not love usually. Lover's Lane or Lover's Parking area. That's usually lust, which is a powerful, very strong, energetic situation too. It's not necessarily negative, but it does cause occurrences, events, strange paranormal things.
Sexual energy is incredibly powerful. So if you're, I actually earlier in the show, I was thinking we should mention the Lover's Lane thing, because you get the monsters and the UFO things on Lover's Lanes where you're generating large amounts of energy from sexual tension, from sex, just sexual energy in general.
Yeah.
And these things, either these things are being projected by those people unconsciously, or something is going, ooh, look at this nice energy.
Yeah, look at that glowing pile of energy over there. Yeah, exactly.
And then we put a face on it.
Or it manifests somehow, or who knows what's going on. I still haven't fallen on one into the other of like, are we really creating this stuff, or is there something manifesting using?
It's like, this is the idea of what you guys are calling energy, or what you're talking about with this energy is not a physical type of energy like vibrating atoms and stuff, but it
might be, but it's not something we can measure yet.
Yeah, not known in our physical universe thus far. But if you look at everything else, any other type of life in the universe, you got to get really close to an extremely powerful giant ball of energy.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, where there is a lack of energy in the physical realm, there is usually a lack of life, or there's much less of it.
Right.
You have to get close to a star.
And we could also tie this into a whole conversation about things like orgone energy.
Yep.
Reich was able to measure orgone energy. That was not, it's like he was silenced because he was basically saying, look, this sexual energy is a real thing and it's powerful.
Yeah.
And the gatekeepers of the time were like, you cannot talk about sexual energy,
Yeah. Yeah. So are you saying we need to blame all this on the sun?
No, I'm just saying, hey, if you guys are talking about this sort of emotional energy, and if there are spiritual quote unquote life forms, they would be drawn to these highly energetic.
Okay.
It's hard to, because it's non-physical, non-tangible time-bound thing, so it's hard to say, well, this place where there's energy, they go to it. They don't necessarily have to travel through space to get there. It's like whatever that realm is like, there's where there is that type of energy, there's going to be something to feed on it, or to thrive within it, just like there is in the physical realm.
Okay.
And look at Laird Scranton's stuff where he talks about a scrolling universe that goes from material to non-material.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that stuff. That's freaking cool.
Yeah.
I love
And
that
I mean,
idea.
none of that does not contradict anything we've talked about.
Yeah, and it ties in with the yugas and multiple us being closer to some other star, which gives us more solar, whatever it is that makes people better at being psychic. I mean, yeah, I see the correlations. That's why I'm saying we got to blame it all on the sun.
Okay, fine.
All right, you know.
Yeah, we would not be having this conversation if it weren't for the sun.
Have you guys ever checked out the electric universe theory?
No.
Obviously, that because so many people mention it to you. I mean, it's one of those things. I think that when people look into it, a lot of times they get really taken with it. I know I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so everyone knows out there, Seriah is a big electric universe guy.
That's right.
And I know these guys are well aware of the electric universe. It gets suggested so much to you guys.
That's right. Oh yeah, we get plenty of
That's
emails.
great.
You guys got to look at the electric universe. We're like, we have.
It's one of those theories. Like, I wish the mainstream scientific establishment would take it a little more seriously.
Yep.
Because it is testable. It is, it has verifiable results. It's probably not completely right, because what is?
Yeah, right.
There's no such thing as anything that's completely right.
Yeah.
But more and more, they keep finding electrical components to all this stuff, and they just continue to not look at it. You know what I mean?
Yep. And I agree with what you've said about, we are electrical beings, and all of this stuff seems to be, I mean, even if you, on the one hand, we're possibly talking about some type of energy that that may be subtle, right? I think it's often referred to as subtle energy. But on the other hand, it may be a part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we don't know how to look at yet, or I don't know. I'm a big fan of science fiction. I've read a lot of my favorite science fiction authors are, some of the old greats like Heinlein and Niven and Arthur C. Clarke. And Heinlein wrote an excellent book about where the science fiction technology in the book was based on it was his take on a unified field theory and symmetry, and that symmetry demands that there be several other spectra of energy that we're just completely unaware of. Sure. And so in the book, they eventually find out they accidentally find out how to one of these spectra, it kills everybody nearby when they turn it on by accident. But some other people are able to sort of figure out what happened, and that leads to them finding the other 4 or 5 or 6, however many it was that need to be there for the energy patterns of the universe to be completely symmetrical. And that, and it was cool because, like, in typical Heinlein fashion, he used this to explain a whole bunch of stuff about ancient civilizations and how they moved giant stones and how they cured things and just all these myths and legends. He kind of explains it. He's like, yeah, that explains all this stuff because here's these other spectra that we just didn't know about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I laugh because that's probably exactly what would happen is we'd be like, oh, look at this. I think we discovered something. Oh, that was bad.
Yeah. Wow. That just killed everyone.
We didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. That's exactly how it worked in the book. They were like, okay, so can we work on it without turning it on this time?
Well, what is it? There's the plasma formations that we find in stone everywhere. There was a plasma physicist who said there are something like 32 forms of plasma energy, and 28 of them are represented in ancient carvings.
Yeah, the petroglyphs you're talking about. Yeah.
And the 4 that aren't, no one would have survived seeing.
Right. They kill you.
Ah, man.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. That means something happened, you know?
Yeah. Maybe some are carved partially because they died while carving it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Oh, look at this one. And okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, and when we look at those giant stones, how did they move those giant stones? We don't have a really good, solid understanding of how that was done.
Right.
We have a lot of theories, but we can't replicate it.
That's right. And like some of the stuff in South America that's vitrified, that seems to have been exposed to extreme heat, like some of the stones from Sacsayhuaman down there, they've sourced the quarries, but when they test the stone from the quarries, it has microfossils in the limestone. But then when they test the limestone of the actual blocks themselves, the microfossils aren't evident.
Really?
And the stone seems to have been subjected to an extreme amount of heat, and in some cases there's vitrification, and no one really has a good answer for it. So yeah, there's all kinds of. I mean, I don't know. I really like we're kind of way off subject now, but I do think
pyramids.
I really like the idea that there were maybe several much more ancient cultures. You know, Jesus Gamara talks about this, that the Hanan Pacha and Uran Pacha, that the three different constructions types down there in South America. The first one was basically they were carving directly out of what Graham Hancock calls the living rock. It was rock cut. They weren't cutting blocks. They were just carving existing stone into shapes. Those are the oldest ones. And then the next ones are the massive megalithic polygonal dry laid, the ones that look like they were molded.
Yeah.
And then there's the latest one was the Inca trying to copy some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just, if what we've been talking about this whole show implies that there are other spectra or other energy types or other things taking place in the universe, or like you've said in some of your other presentations, that we don't really have a full grasp on the fundamental nature of all of reality. We see a piece of it, but we don't really have a grasp on all of it. There's parts of it that are still outside of our understanding. And we've talked about the electromagnetic spectrum, but the reason we've discovered all of these pieces of the electromagnetic spectrum that we aren't able to experience directly is because we can experience directly a piece of it. So we start out knowing that the spectrum is there, and then that it's just a matter of working on it to figure out, oh, there's all these lower wavelengths and all these higher ones that we can't see, and then we can build instruments to see them. But how do you start looking at a spectra or a type of energy that you yourself have no senses for? How would you even begin to build a tool to see it?
Well, but even the energies we do have senses for, like Kundalini energy, which, people who are practitioners of Kundalini yoga, especially advanced practitioners, can raise and lower at will. I mean, they've done tests where they've been able to, I forget what they used, but they had a monk go into a meditative state, and they can actually pick up the chakras.
Yeah, and they're picking it up with instruments that are looking at electromagnetic spectra, right? That's basically
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're that's another part of the nature of the universe, is that all of these things interact with each other, even if it's in very subtle ways. So whatever that monk is doing with some other completely other type of energy is also causing waves in the electromagnetic spectrum that we can pick up. But is that the source, or is that a secondary cause?
Yeah. Yeah. And I can definitely attest to the fact that Kundalini is very electrical.
Yeah.
And when you look at most of these paranormal encounters, again, you're seeing a lot of descriptions of electrical energy.
That's right. Yep.
So that is definitely a key component to all this stuff.
Yep. And I love how the universe or nature is just analogous to itself and to the greater picture, where you see the Fibonacci spiral in these tiny little shells and stuff. And then you find out, oh, wow, the whole universe is like that.
Yeah.
And,
Galaxies are doing the same thing. Yeah.
It's stuff like that. You see the waves on water. And how long were people seeing that before they realized that the sounds they were hearing and the stuff that they were seeing was also just like that in a way. These waves traveling out and all of it, you know, it's like it's always showing us a little piece of the picture and saying, hey, there's a bigger picture that's just like this. Just like we have sight, which is one tiny little fraction of the entirety of the electromagnetic spectrum, is kind of telling us like, hey, you're only experiencing one tiny little piece of the total of reality. It's totally true.
Well, it's because we're living in a computer simulation.
No, come on, guy.
And they just said, we'll just use this algorithm for everything.
But what I was going to say is you pointing that out suggests that the same thing may be happening with time. Look, you're experiencing this little piece of it, the part right now that you see as the present. But actually,
all of this time
is always extant, and you can experience parts of things that aren't in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There's a bigger picture.
It's likely that our higher consciousness experiences all of this at once, but for whatever reason, we've chosen to experience it in this linear fashion here.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you were a consciousness, a being that existed in a place where it was like an eternal instant, that time either didn't exist or you were in all of it at the same time, then stuff would be kind of boring because you can't really make any choices, right? Everything is already happening or has happened or is, you know what I'm saying? That the words break down. So maybe you would want to take a ride in a place where you can do stuff. And, where you, for a little while at least, you don't know what's about to happen.
You can go play a video game.
That's right. Yeah.
The video game analogy does actually work really well with that type of stuff.
Yep.
Because you can be outside the game and have knowledge that the avatar in the game does not have.
Yeah, that's right.
But yet you can respond to that knowledge because you're being controlled by a higher force.
That's right. There's and that's what all the synchronicities and little clues and hints and things are.
Yeah.
They may be the method for the higher self trying to control this linear being. No, go that way.
That's it. Maybe the higher self doesn't have direct control over us.
Yeah.
It can only hint at stuff. So it tries to show us things in dreams. It tries to push us in certain directions with synchronicities. And sometimes we listen and sometimes we don't.
If it jumped in there and made you do something, you'd come out of the dream.
Yeah,
you'd
maybe.
Wake up.
Or, you get home and go, I don't remember driving home.
Must have been my higher self.
My higher self realized I was dozing off and took over for a little bit.
That's right. All right, Seriah, this has been a fantastic show. Why don't you tell everybody about your podcast and where people can find you?
My podcast deals with all of this stuff and much, much more. Everything from lost civilizations, although that was a big focus early on, and then I sort of lost that for a bit. Paranormal, UFOs, consciousness, people's stories, weird history, lost history. So, all that stuff. Wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's wheredidtheroadgo.com is everything. So everything is linked there. The YouTube, we're on all the popular podcatchers and all that stuff. And there's merch, and there's the entire archive of shows, and there's a Patreon for extra content, and I think that's everything.
Yeah, and what show number? Do you number your shows? Do you know how many you've published?
My shows, because my shows. So mine started as a radio show. It's still on the radio, and so they're just dated.
So what would you estimate? 400?
Well, I've done at least one show a week since January 26, 2013. I've never missed a week. Most weeks have at least one, maybe two, occasionally three shows.
That doesn't tell me a number. I can't do the watcher math. Where's the watcher?
I can't do that math either. But let's simplify.
Lots of content.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of content, and some videos up on the YouTube as well as actual shows. But let's see, that the clock is not going to give me a calculator. Okay, so 2013
times 2013 to now. Let's see, that's 7 years times 52, one a week.
Well, we'll say 8 years, one a week is about 416. So probably in the 500 range.
Okay, I was thinking 400 or 500. All right, that wasn't too bad. That's excellent. Yeah. So where to the roadgo.com. People check it out. Seriah always has great content and lots of guests with lots of interesting content. So,
including you guys.
Yeah. Sometimes even us. If you can't get enough of the Snake Bros here at Snake Bros, you can always go to Where Did the Road Go and find us there.
And if you're into metal, you can check out my music show at thelastexit.org.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's proof
With no AC/DC.
Yeah, there will not be any AC/DC. It's underground dark music, whether it be metal, punk, hardcore, industrial noise, some comedy music, but it's not anything you're going to hear on the bigger stations.
All right, there you go. Dark metal. Seriah. All right, people, check him out. Thanks so much for coming on, Seriah.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
And as for our stuff, you guys all know, brothersofserpent.com. You can find everything there.
We love you.
We always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.